All right, well, welcome to Bible study, and tonight we're going to be in chapter 5. Now, I have to say in advance, I'm not going to give you a rundown of the previous chapters because I'm going to do that for chapter 6. It makes a lot more sense to do it for chapter 6. You'll see why. Another thing I want to say is that chapter 5 and chapter 6 for me have been the hardest two chapters of Zechariah to wrap my mind around and come up with what it's talking about. So, what I'm going to present to you are my interpretations. Because they are interpretations, they may be untrue. They may be things that I'm thinking that are not correct. So, you're going to need to use your wisdom and determine whether or not I have the right interpretation. One last thing that I want to say is that what I'm going to be talking about tonight as an interpretation may be offensive to some people. If you are Catholic, you are probably going to not appreciate what I have to say tonight because it's going to hit you in a spot perhaps that is sensitive. So I ask in advance that you forgive me. You know, if you're listening to this, that I care very much about you. I care very much about Catholics. I do not like the system. That's obvious. That I've been honest about that. But the people themselves, I love and care for, and what I'm presenting is the truth as I best see it. So, once again, I ask you to forgive me in advance if I offend, because that really isn't my intention. My intention is to faithfully present what I see God talking about in chapter 5. All right, enough of that. Let's move on. And the first thing that I want to tell you is that, once again, I'm using the Net translation of the Bible. Not my favorite translation of the Bible by far, but it is the translation that allows me to teach an entire book of the Bible and put it online for free. With that said, let's go ahead and jump right in. So we're in chapter 5, and in the Net Bible they call this Vision 6, the flying scroll. Chapter 5 verse 1 says, "Then I turned to look, and there was a flying scroll. Someone asked me, 'What do you see?' I replied, 'I see a flying scroll 30 feet long and 15 feet wide.'" Immediately here in chapter 5, we're given an image that is hard to determine what it is. There's not too many scrolls in the Bible, and we haven't really read enough to have some context. So actually, let's go ahead and read verse 3 and 4, then we'll come back. So verse 3 says, the speaker went on to say, "This is a curse traveling across the whole earth. For example, according to the curse, whoever steals will be removed from the community, or on the other hand, according to the curse, whoever swears falsely will suffer the same fate. I will send it out, says the Lord of heaven's armies, and it will enter the house of the thief and of the person who swears falsely in my name. It will land in the middle of his house and destroy both timber and stones." So now that we have a little bit of context, we look at this scroll. This scroll is said to be a curse, and it's said to be from the Lord, and it's said to attack people that are doing wrong. So even though it's a curse, this is not a bad thing at all. Now, we don't have too many scrolls in the Bible. So when we look at scrolls in the Bible, the one that comes to mind immediately is the one from Revelation 5 and 6. The scroll with the 7 seals on it. This is the scroll, I've mentioned this before, that I believe is the deed to the earth. And it is also an outline of the entire tribulation period. That's the part that's really controversial, because I know most Christians don't believe that. As a matter of fact, I don't know too many Christians that do. I only know one other Christian who believes that. But that's what I believe. I believe that this scroll with the seals on it in Revelations 5 and 6 is the outline of the entire tribulation period. Now, we got to remember that the previous vision was the vision of Zerubbabel laying the capstone. So Jesus coming as king to defeat the Antichrist, to destroy Babylon, and to bring to bring righteousness to Israel for 1,000 years. Because remember, Satan will be bound at that time for 1,000 years and put into the bottomless pit. And at the end of the 1,000 years, he will be released to once again cause havoc. At which point God says, enough's enough, and he destroys the earth and all those who are in it who are evil. Meanwhile, taking the goodies, the good ones, to heaven, and then he will make a new heaven and a new earth which will not have been polluted by sin or anything of that nature. So here we have the scroll. Now, what's the scroll doing? It says in verse 3 that the scroll is going out across the entire earth. And this scroll, I don't like the words for example. That's not necessarily in the text, the Hebrew text. And it kind of throws things off. Like there's other things that are listed in the scroll. But in the Hebrew, it clearly says it's the thief and the liar. And there doesn't seem to be any suggestion that there's other commandments that are being broken. So this goes across the whole earth. So this is including both Jews and Gentiles. So my mind is automatically starting to think in lines of Exodus and the plagues, and how there were plagues that affected people, but they didn't necessarily, it affected Egypt, right? When I say people, sorry, I should be more clear. It affected the non-believing Gentiles of Egypt, but it did not affect the Jews. And I'm thinking Exodus because of the tribulation, and I'm thinking about Revelation and how the scrolls seem to, when the seals on the scroll are opened up, they seem to affect the world, but Israel itself doesn't seem to be affected. So there seems to be a connection there in my mind. Now you could disagree with that, but that's the way my mind is thinking about these things. So what is this curse doing? This curse is going out into the whole world, mostly the Gentile world, and it is removing from society anybody who steals or anybody who lies, who swears falsely. Now I'm thinking about this, and I'm thinking this cannot possibly be happening in our own time, because it seems like everybody I know is a thief and a liar these days. I just have to watch the news, and I see Nordstrom's on the news more often than not with tons of people stealing things, and everybody I know is lying about something, but they're not being thrown out of society, at least not yet. So I don't think that that's what this is talking about. I don't think it's talking about the typical thievery and lying that we see around us. So in my mind, I'm connecting this with Satan, because Satan is said to be the father of lies, and he's also a thief and a murderer. Okay, there's other things that the Bible calls him as well. And I believe that what this is, remember that the Antichrist is going to represent Satan on earth. I believe that what we're talking about here in verse 3 is those in the tribulation days who will associate themselves with the Antichrist, who is the ultimate human thief and liar. He's a thief because remember in Ezekiel 38, which once again, controversially, I no longer believe is Russia and all that coming down, although I believe that Russia will be there. But I believe that Gog is the Antichrist. And remember what Saudi Arabia, Dedan, says in Ezekiel 38. He says, have you come for booty? So the Antichrist is going to plunder. The people that are with the Antichrist are going to plunder Israel. We know that because at the end of Zechariah, God is going. Sorry, spoiler notes. At the end of Zechariah, God is going to allow the remnant to plunder those who have plundered them. So these are the thieves. And we know that the Antichrist is going to make the ultimate lie. He's going to make a peace covenant with Israel for 7 years and then deliberately break it in half, in the halfway point. So he's going to be a liar. He's going to be just like Satan. So once again, I see verse 3 as being those who are following the Antichrist. And And this curse is once again the seals on the scroll as Christ returns his kingdom to himself. With that in mind, verse 4 I see as the Antichrist. So when it says it will enter the house of the thief and of the person who swears falsely in my name, I actually see this as one person, not many people. And I see this as the Antichrist. Perhaps it's also the false prophet, but I don't really see it so much as that, as just the Antichrist. And notice in the last part of verse 4, it says, it will land in the middle of his house and destroy both timber and stones. And my mind goes back to Revelation, where God destroys Babylon. That's one of the last things he does before he deals with the Antichrist. He destroys Babylon. Now, Babylon, if you watch videos on it, and by the way, Joel Kramer on YouTube, I think it's Expedition Bible is his YouTube channel. Joel Kramer is an archaeologist, and he does a wonderful job showing you the things in the Bible that you're reading about, and talking about them in ways that you don't see anywhere else. And so he's a real archaeologist. And Joel Kramer recently did a show on Babylon, and he walked through the foundation, because Babylon existed for a long time, and then it got ruined. And then I believe it was Alexander the Great who took down the ruins and started to rebuild Babylon and redid the foundation. So Joel Kramer walks you through Babylon, and it's nowhere near being built again. So the question then becomes, when God destroys Babylon in Revelation, is he destroying something that's rebuilt at the old Babylon, or is it referring to someplace else in the world? Is it just a symbol now? At any rate, here at the end of verse 4, it says, it will land in the middle of his house and destroy both timber and stones. And I believe this is talking in verse 4, the Antichrist, and whatever Babylon is going to be as a structure. So let's move on then into the next, what Net Bible calls Vision 7, the Ephah. And this is going to be several verses. I'm only going to put the first two on this slide because I need to talk in depth about this. And this is where we start getting into some controversial stuff. So in verse 5, it says, and I'll read 5 through 7 here. After this, the angelic messenger who had been speaking to me went out and said, "Look, see what is leaving." I asked, "What is it?" And he replied, "It is a basket for measuring grain that is moving away from here." Moreover, he said, "This is their eye throughout all the earth." Then a round lead cover was raised up, revealing a woman sitting inside the basket. All right, the picture you see on the screen, I have taken from a website, and this is a ephah basket, what they imagine an ancient ephah basket would look like. And so it's a large size basket, and once again, it's for measuring grain. And you notice that this one also has a cover on the top. And I think most of the ephah baskets we see nowadays, I'll show you one in a few minutes, don't have a cover, and in fact they don't have a way really to put a cover on. So this is a really good image to have in our mind. But notice this is a recognizable image for Zechariah. And when he's asked, what is this, he should know that this is an ephah basket, correct? But because the angel says it is a basket for measuring grain, but he doesn't quite recognize it. So then the question becomes, why doesn't he recognize it? And it must be because its shape is a little bit, that it isn't really a basket. It's something else that is being called a basket. And maybe it has kind of the appearance of a basket. Now, when we're talking about any kind of measuring tends to be a concept related to judgment or related to something of that, of examination. So we've been thinking about the measuring rods in previous conversations, the plummet stones, things like that. They deal with judgment, or they deal with examination. And so this is a basket I would like to say it's a basket of judgment. And the reason why is, well, I'm getting ahead of myself, but it has to deal with this woman who's inside the basket. Now, notice what it says. It says in the blue part of the verse. Oh, before I move on, I want to say one more thing about the red. Notice the angel says that it is moving away from here. So once again, we're in this position where, are we talking about moving in space, or are we talking about moving in time? And to be consistent with myself throughout Zechariah, I'm going to interpret this as movement through time. So, with that in mind, this is talking about something that's in the future. And by the way, that kind of would correspond with what we just read in verses 1 through 4, talking about the future, the scroll going out and getting rid of the thief and destroying his house, timbers and stones. So, that kind of gives a little bit more truth to the idea that moving away is moving away in time. But notice in the blue, the angel says, this is their eye throughout all the earth. And what do we do with that word eye? Do we make a pyramid with an eye on the top, like on the back of the dollar bill? I don't know if that's the case. I think what the word eye here means, and this is what the New King James Version says, this is their resemblance. Okay, so this is a resemblance to it. And I want you to notice that this is their eye. It's plural, so there's more than one that's being addressed. Now, is it one? Or is it two? Is it three? I don't know that we can say quite yet. We may not be able to say it all, but it's plural, and in their plurality, they look like this basket, this measuring grain that is moving away. And they're not just in Israel or the Middle East, they're throughout all the earth. So these are the details that we want to think about. So they have a resemblance to the basket. There's more than one, and they're throughout all the earth. So let's just put that in the back of our mind for a minute, and I'll show you what I believe we're talking about. But in verse 7, it says, then a round lead cover was raised up. So if it's a cover, we're assuming it's on the basket. So then a round lead cover was raised up, revealing a woman sitting inside the basket. So is the basket made of lead as well? Or is it a basket like what we're seeing, but someone has put a different type of cover on it, one that is heavy, one that is meant to keep the woman in the basket? And I think that last part is what we're doing based on the next verses. But notice that it is a woman sitting inside the basket. So once again, we have this basket image. Now that means that this woman is being picked up from one place and moved to another place through time. So we're not talking about a real, actual, physical woman. We're talking about a woman who represents something symbolically. One woman, notice it says a woman sitting inside, but this is their eye. So it's a woman, but this woman has many different, personas, many different ways of appearing in the world. Okay, so keep all that in mind. And when we think about this basket, then something that's in the past, something that's going to be in the future, and we kind of are looking at scripture to give us some ideas of what may be in mind here. And one of the things is this probably, I think it does, connect to our previous discussion about the Antichrist and Babylon. And when we think about the shape of a basket, it's possible that it may represent a type of building shaped similarly to the Tower of Babel. Okay, so this is a picture. I believe this was done, I think it was done kind of in the Middle Ages or after the Middle Ages. I don't actually know. I should have looked that up, but unfortunately, I'm lazy. And but at any rate, here's a picture of the Tower of Babel that someone has painted. Now, this is not exactly what it looked like. We have a much better idea of what it looks like from other things. It looked more like a pyramid shaped that had steps in it. And I think there, if I recall correctly, there were 8 steps, 8 or 7 steps in it, because there's actually paintings of the Tower of Babel. Or not paintings, sorry. There's actually carvings of the Tower of Babel in stone, uh, with Nebuchadnezzar kind of looking at it. I don't remember what that's called either, and I don't know how to look that up, to be honest with you. But you might be able to figure that out. At any rate, take a look at the basket. Take a look at the Tower of Babel. There does seem to be a connection in shape, if you will. Think about a modern ephod basket turned upside down. This is their appearance in all the world. Interesting. I'll take a look at that in just a second. But once again, the eye connects to the woman. And so this woman, because it has to be a symbolic woman, seems to represent a religious system that is connected to the building, the basket. And that's very clear of the Tower of Babel. So let's go ahead and take a look at that. So you can see on the screen it says this, not this. So I'm going to give you some suggestions of what I think it is. But there are some things happening in the news right now that are concerning, and I want to make sure we understand that it can't be those things. How's that for creating a little bit of intrigue? So let's go ahead and get started. And let's take a look at these are ziggurats and pyramids because they are both similar in shape. Now the ziggurat has steps in it. So if you're looking at this picture, and let me see if I can. Whoop, that's not what I wanted to do. Oh, and that's not what I wanted to do too. So I'm giving away everything ahead of time. And what I really wanted was this doodad. Okay, so here's a ziggurat right there, and you can see that has clear steps. And you can see what I mean by steps. It actually does look like steps that go up to the very top. And let's just put a big red eye at the top of it. And then there's another ziggurat, although we may call these pyramids. So at any rate, these are throughout all the world, literally. South America, we have some in America, we have some in China, we have stuff all over the world, these ziggurat shapes. And then what I have here is a modern ephod basket. This is from the Amish. This is the way ephod baskets look today. And you can see they're a large basket. Probably we might call it a bushel basket, and they're open at the top. So very hard to put a lead cover on there. So you understand why I put the picture previous, because that clearly has a way of putting a lead cover on it. And what I want to suggest to you is that if this is the past and it's coming in the future, then we may be looking for something like this, which, by the way, actually was based on the Tower of Babel picture by Peter Bruegel. Okay, that was a deliberate design choice. So here we have something that looks like a basket in our modern time. Now, is it like a ziggurat? No, but it may be functioning like that. And if Zechariah saw this flying through the air, he might very well ask, what is that? Since they had nothing like that in his time. But it may not be that we're talking about a basket like that. It could be that we are talking about something like, let me go to my slide, something like this. And this is the hotel at Davos, where all the world leaders meet for the World Economic Forum. And you might notice it kind of does have a basket shape on the top. Now, I'm being controversial and conspiratorial. Do I really believe that? I don't know. The EU building, I kind of do believe. But the Davos, I'm just adding there to be, I don't know what the word is, firebombish, I suppose. But they all kind of go together, don't they? They all kind of go together. There is a religious system, believe it or not, in that EU building. It's the same religious system that's in the UN building. And I'm not being religious or saying religious in the sense of a very large, broad sense. Quite literally, there is a religious system, a new form of religion that is being created in order to control people by the EU, by the UN, and I'll show you the book where you can read more about that at the very end of this presentation. So that's this. I think this is what we're talking about. I think this is what Zechariah is seeing. He's seeing this ephah, and it's connecting to all the pagan stuff in the past, and it's connecting to all the pagan stuff that's about to be foisted upon us in the earth. And this is probably where the Antichrist is going to start getting his feet wet in terms of world domination. Now, what am I not talking about? In the news, we're getting a lot of conversation about UFOs. It's now, someone said that it's now conspiratorial to say that UFOs don't exist because they're everywhere. People are talking about them. People are seeing. Our government is actually having closed session meetings about UFOs. There's been releases of information. So as we read Zechariah, and we have this basket with the lead cover that is being lifted up, I don't think we're talking about an ephah that looks like this, even though it may look like that. Okay, because inside those UFOs, I don't think each one of those has a religious system. Okay, so it may have a shape that's similar to an ephah if you were to take an ephah basket and smash it down into that shape. But this lead cover idea, like here's one that looks like a lead cover, doesn't it? But that's clearly not what the Bible has in mind, because these things that you're seeing, these UFOs, if they actually are manifesting, they're manifesting as demonic objects. Because we know that there can't be aliens on other planets. God didn't create other life forms on other planets that were sentient. This is the planet that has the sentient beings in it. And so when that lead cover, though, remember that it's holding down, it's covering the wickedness of a system. And clearly the UFOs, they're not holding down wickedness. They are actually, if they actually are manifesting, they are themselves wickedness. So this is not what we have in mind, and we should not accept that from pastors or others who may suggest that Zechariah is talking about UFOs. So let's think this through then. We have this basket. Once again, Zechariah doesn't recognize it. Probably it relates back to the Babylon conversation, in which case we're talking about a building. There are plurality of that resemblance. So once again, it has to happen in the past with the religious system because it has a woman in it, and it has to happen in the future as a building because it contains a religious system that has a woman in it. All right. Now, what is that thing going to be exactly? Is it going to be the EU building? Is it going to be something else? And I don't know that we can say. So a Bible principle that I've been trying to follow is, if something is still unclear in the text, then it suggests that it still waits a future fulfillment, that we can only go so far in identifying something because the actual thing that it represents has not yet been created. So we kind of have a sense of it coming, but we don't actually know for sure. And I think that's the safest way to do Bible interpretation. Okay, with that in mind, let's break all the rules and start identifying things. So in chapter 5, verse 8, he then said, this woman represents wickedness. So this system, this religious system in the basket, in this building, is wickedness. And he pushes her down into the basket and placed the lead cover on top. So that's the first thing we want to see here. All right. So the woman represents wickedness. So when we think in the Bible about wicked women, you might come up with, I mean, there's a few wicked, there's a lot of wicked men. So I'm not being sexist here. The Bible is equal in terms of women and men being wicked. But when you think about wicked women, you might think about Jezebel at first. Maybe that's a good thing to think about. But I don't think that's what the Bible has in mind. There's a woman who's even more wicked than Jezebel in the future, and that is the great whore of Babylon from Revelation chapter 17. And I think that's the form, that's the women, the female form that best represents wickedness in the Bible. And especially for this, because that woman, that whore of Babylon, is not a real whore. She's not a real woman, but she represents a religious system within Babylon, which seems to be what we're talking about in these visions. Now, notice that lead cover is the angel is pushing her down, or pushing it down on her so that she can't get out. And so it makes sense that this lead cover may represent either the church with being pushed down by the Holy Spirit so that wickedness can't escape, that it's the church who is helping to restrain, or it may actually be that the lead cover represents the Holy Spirit himself. He's called the restrainer in Scripture, and we know that evil is not going to break out, it says in the New Testament, until the restrainer is taken away. And I should have gotten that verse, and I forgot to do that. But you can easily look that up. Look up the word restrainer on Google, restrainer Bible, and it should get you to that verse. All right, but at any rate, notice this lead cover is being put on top to keep the wickedness in place, because it's not the time for this great wickedness yet. That's going to be coming in the future. So once again, that kind of gives credence to the idea that we're talking about the tribulation time. But let's go on to verse 9. Actually, before we get to verse 9, let's take a look at this great whore, because this is where I'm going to need some patience and some love and some forgiveness in advance here. Here we go. So as we look at Revelation chapter 17, or chapter 17, yeah, the scarlet woman and the scarlet beast. Let's go ahead and read through there. And it says, then one of the seven angels who had the seven bowls, okay, so this is in the third set of judgments. We have, think of Revelation as stab. So the stab, the S stands for seals, the T stands for trumpets, and then we have the third set of judgments, which is bowls, stab. So this is in the third set of judgments in Revelation. Then one of the seven angels who had the seven bowls came and talked with me, saying to me, come, I will show you the judgment of the great harlot who sits on many waters. Okay, so we're going to find out that this many waters is actually a symbol. It's not actually talking about physical waters. Okay, we'll see that in a little bit. Verse 2, with whom the kings of the earth committed fornication, and the inhabitants of the earth were made drunk with the wine of her fornication. All right, so whatever this system is, the kings of the earth, not just the kings at the end, although maybe it's including the kings at the end, but this is a system that has been around for a while, and the kings of the earth have been connected to this system. And the inhabitants of the earth were made drunk with the wine of her fornication. So fornication in the Bible, symbolically, when we're talking about religion, tends to be about pagan worship. Okay, so fornicating with another god, as it were. And so we see that whoever was connected with this system tended to also indulge in the paganism of this religious system. Now, the idea that we're talking about a fornication kind of suggests, well, I won't go there quite yet. We'll move on. Verse 3. So he carried me away in the spirit into the wilderness, and I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast, which was full of names of blasphemy, having 7 heads and 10 horns. Okay, now once again, I'm going to stop here because you're going to think that I'm making stuff up, and I'm not making stuff up. Whoops. What did I just do? I clicked the wrong thing. I went all the way to the back. All right, hang on a second. Something is not right. All right, let's go over here, and let's go. Wow. All right. There we go. You're with me now. I'm with me. I'm with me. Okay. I'm sorry about that. All right. So what I wanted to say was talking about these 7 heads and 10 horns and many waters. And I was what I was doing is I was working on my phone trying to make it bigger for me to see, because unfortunately I do. Oh, there they are. Couldn't find my glasses at first, and this print is very small on my phone. All right, so here we go. So it says, do, 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 do. Let's go down to here. And he said to me, verse 15, then he said to me, the waters which you saw where the harlot sits, remember I told you this was symbolic. It says these are peoples, multitudes, nations, and tongues. So this is in the Gentile world. This is not going to be in the Jewish world. This whore has nothing to do with Israel. It's in the Gentile world, and it actually has nothing to do with real water. It has to do with water symbolizing peoples, multitudes, nations, and tongues. Okay, then let's look at that beast that she's sitting on. It says in verse 3 up here that she's sitting on a scarlet beast, which was full of names of blasphemy, having 7 heads and 10 horns. So blasphemy would be blasphemy against God, having doctrines perhaps that are against the Bible. And this this uh this beast having 7 heads and 10 horns. It says that the 10 horns which you saw on the beast, these will hate the harlot, make her desolate and naked, eat her flesh, and burn her with fire. So this reminds us, these 10 horns remind us very much of Daniel. And we remember in Daniel that there's going to be 10 kings who rise up to rule the entire world. The Antichrist is a little horn, the 11th horn, it says, that rises up from among them. He actually destroys 3 of the horns. So when we have the 10 horns, we need to interpret this very carefully. Does that mean that this destruction is going to happen before the Antichrist kills 3 of the horns? Or is this after the Antichrist has killed 3 of the horns and he actually becomes the 3 horns? So this is up for interpretation. I don't know that we are going to have an answer to this. So once again, if there's not a clear answer, I think we just leave it and say that it's going to be a future interpretation. We're going to have to wait to see how this pans out. All right, and then and by the way, here it is again in verse 12. The 10 horns which you saw are 10 kings who have received no kingdom as yet, but they receive authority for 1 hour as kings with the beast. Okay, so this kind of suggests that it's going to be the former, that it's going to be the 10 actual kings. But the problem with our interpretation is, how do we interpret the destruction of Babylon in Revelation? And even though this is 10 horns at the beginning, is this going to still be the same 10 when Babylon is destroyed? Do you understand what I'm saying? Is that, yes, it represents 10 kings who come up with Babylon, but then maybe perhaps in between verse 12 and the destruction of Babylon in Revelation, maybe perhaps we're not talking about exactly the same 10 kings. So I will let you decide. Now, once again, horns represents kings. Here is the mind which has wisdom, verse 9. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman sits. So traditionally, that has been interpreted literally. 7 hills, 7 mountains. And of course, the Catholic Church, the Vatican, sits on 7 hills. It's actually called the City of 7 Hills. So traditionally, pretty much ever since Revelation came out, people have been pointing to Rome as this foul system. And then when the Catholic Church comes, they are right there in Rome building up the religious system of it. So that's kind of interesting. However, take a look at the next verse. There are also 7 kings 5 have fallen, one is, and the other has not yet come. Now these are not the same. These are not the same 7 kings with the 10 kings. This is talking about um, something quite different. Um, and so we're not going to get into that right now because I'm already starting to go down a rabbit hole and getting a little afraid of the dark in there. So I think what we're going to do is we're going to keep on, now that we kind of have the idea that we're not talking about physical things. Now, mountains represent things that are greater than horns. So just keep in mind that we have 7 units of something, probably physical, okay, both physical and then also representing that area as well. So representing Rome in some way, or at least empires of some way, which Rome is one. And then also we're talking about 10 additional horns who are smaller because once again the Antichrist is going to be much greater than them. The Antichrist is going to be part of the mountains. All right. So then we have the woman was arrayed in purple and scarlet, adorned with gold, precious stones, and pearls. I mean, if that doesn't speak about the Pope and his uh, cabinet, I don't know what does. By the way, I need to once again remind you, I'm not bashing Catholics. I'm not trying to. I will gladly bash the Pope and the people who rule, but there is a clear distinction between Catholics, the people who have been duped by a religious system that doesn't even teach them the Bible. And this distinction is between the people and the rulers of the Catholic Church who have, through history, actively fought against the Bible. And this is a matter of historical fact. So, once again, I'm just going to present the truth, and I'm going to ask you forgive me in advance. I am not for the Catholic Church as leadership, but I am for the Catholic people. In fact, in Revelation chapter 3, we see that there are going to be Catholics who are saved. There are going to be Catholics who are saved. So this is a Christian church, but it has been hijacked by people who are bringing basically paganism into the church. Okay, controversial statement. Once again, please forgive me. And I haven't even got to the part yet that is the painful part. So, at any rate, here we go. Having in her hand a golden cup full of abominations and the filthiness of her fornication. Okay, so she's been doing some bad, bad stuff that is against God. And on her forehead a name was written, Mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and of the abominations of the earth. Okay, I want you to remember this descriptor for the great whore. Okay, mystery just means that she has not been revealed yet. And clearly that's what Zechariah is saying. The lead cover is still on her. She's a woman sitting in the basket. So she has a final fulfillment that is not yet seen. This is Babylon the Great, which means that this goes back to the Tower of Babel. This woman goes back to the Tower of Babel, which connects to what I'm saying about the basket being seen through time. But this in Revelation 17 is future. Okay, so this is, I hope, starting to give evidence to my interpretation. She is the mother of harlots. So if you are the mother, that means there are daughters, I'm assuming, because if they're, harlots, women. So she is the mother of harlots. So from her come other harlots. So I don't know that in the future, when we start talking about this in the next slide or two, I don't think we're talking about just 2 things. I think we're talking about maybe 3 things. Once again, keep that in mind, and remember it's harlots plural. And of the abominations of the earth. Okay. I saw the woman drunk with blood of the saints. Okay, the saints are us Christians, so that means this has to be in existence today. It has to be in existence since the time of Christ with the blood of the martyrs of Jesus. So this religious system has to have killed Christians. So I'm calling this the Catholic Church. And We have Fox's Book of Martyrs, which talks about a certain time period in history when the Catholic Church was killing people who were protesting left and right. We see that we see that they've destroyed whole communities, even chased them down into Switzerland to destroy anything that stood against the power of the Catholic Church. Once again, we're not talking about the Catholic people, we're talking about the popes and the leadership who have done this. So I believe very much that what we're talking about here is this woman is the Catholic Church in part, not in whole, but in part. And I'll show you why in just a minute. Let's go ahead and continue on here with our thing. So once again, Revelation 17, the great whore pushing her down. So you can see that what really restrains the popes and the leadership from going too far off is actually probably the Catholic people, the Protestant people, who are holding down the wickedness of where this system is eventually going to go. So it's the people. It's the people. Now remember what God said in Zechariah, not by strength, not by power, but by faith. And I think this is what we see, is that it's the faithfulness of good Catholic believers, those who actually do believe in Jesus, who are trusting in Jesus to save them from their sins, that it's those, and it was the Protestants, although we see in Revelation chapter 3, the Protestants are no good. And then it's also the evangelicals. Those people are holding back the wickedness. Okay, but that wickedness is going to be released when the restrainer leaves. And what happens to all those Christian people? We all get raptured. So this is actually talking a little bit about that time after the rapture. Let's go to verse 9 because I think we're losing the flow of this. So actually, let's start again with 8. He then said, this woman represents wickedness, and he pushed her down onto the basket and placed the lead cover on top. Verse 9, then I looked again and saw 2 women going forth with the wind in their wings. They had wings like those of a stork, and they lifted up the basket between the earth and the sky. This is pretty pregnant with meaning. Sorry, I do not mean that as a pun. But we see that this is 2 women now going forth with the wind in their wings. This is now 3 women we're talking about. 1 in the basket and 2 who are coming. And they have the wings of a stork. Now, a stork is an unclean bird. Okay, it's an unclean bird. And it's kind of funny that we attach storks with babies as well. So it's something that they birth. They bring a child of some sort. It's kind of, I don't know if that's what's in mind here. I don't know if Jewish people had that in as a concept, but at any rate, they did have the concept of a stork as an unclean bird, and these women are also unclean because they have the wings of a stork. And what are they doing? They're carrying the basket with this wickedness, this wicked woman in it. And it says it lifted up the basket between earth and sky. So if we think about earth where man is and sky where God is, you can see that they're putting the basket between God and man. They're coming in between God and man. They're making themselves gods in a sense, gods with a little g. All right. Now that would make really good sense to call these women then the queens of heaven. They're putting themselves as in between God and men. They're making themselves to be little gods. They become the queens of heaven. Now remember that they're plural. Here we see that there's at least 2, possibly 3 women, because we don't know whether these 2 women represent what's in the basket or not. So we can't actually say there's more than that there's 3. But at the least, because it's their eye, this has to be 2 women at the very, very least. And these 2 women at the very least represent the Queen of Heaven. Now we have 2 queens of heaven, don't we? We have a pagan Queen of Heaven. And we also have a Christian Queen of Heaven. The pagan Queen of Heaven was called Semiramis from the time of Nimrod and the Tower of Babel. And as she moves through this demonic, I'm going to use the word demonic with both of them because this is actually an entity. It's a spiritual entity. That's what gods are. This demonic figure, Semiramis, goes throughout the Fertile Crescent, and her name becomes other things: Astarte, Aphrodite, Inanna. Inanna is one we're going to look at a little bit more in detail. And she's called the Queen of Heaven in all these cultures. Interesting, isn't it? And then it's also interesting that the Catholic Church, being part of the Roman culture, what did Rome do? Every time Rome conquered a country, they adopted the religious practices of the people they conquered in order to create a connective tissue so that there wouldn't be rebellion. And they just incorporated those religious elements from the people they conquered into their own. That's sort of what has happened in the Catholic Church. As the Catholic Church has spread out, it has adopted pagan practices and brought them into itself. Once again, a controversial statement. I ask you for forgiveness, but when we actually look at practice versus Bible, there's a very clear distinction. In the Christian era, this Queen of Heaven is Mary. And we call her the Queen of Heaven. She seems to have powers beyond what a normal woman should have. Because if she is a normal human woman, she should be in heaven with Jesus. She shouldn't be allowed to be wandering about. That's not what the Bible says happens to us. Even Jesus' mom. That's not, she should be in heaven with Jesus, with the saints, waiting for us. She doesn't get special privileges. She has no special powers. But I want to remind you of what we're seeing in the world. Let's just assume that everything that is said to us about Mary is true. We see that statues of Mary are bleeding from their eyes. We see that people are seeing Mary and she's talking to them. And never once when she talks to them does she have the message of her son. Repent. Turn from your sin. Look to Jesus as the only way. Okay? Be baptized. She never has any of that to say. She always draws the attention back to herself. I'm going to tell you, and I know this is going to hurt people, but this is the truth. Mary of the Catholic Church is not Mary, the mother of Jesus. In fact, they don't even call her really Mary, the mother of Jesus. They call her Mary, the mother of God. God has no mother. God has no mother. God created everything. God has no beginning. And Jesus is God. Jesus as God has no mother. He has a physical human mother because he is human, but he is God. There is no mother of God. But notice that this Mary has lifted herself up between earth and heaven, has made herself a little God, has called herself the Queen of Heaven. This is not the Mary of the Bible. This is a demonic figure, the same demonic figure that is Semiramis. But it's trying to put on Christian clothes to be acceptable. It's trying to get us to fornicate with her spiritually. I'm sorry to say this because once again, I know this is hurtful to some people. But when we follow Mary, we're following a demon. Okay, I'm going to go a little bit more into this because there's more connections in just this. But I want to say here at the last part that having read Carl Teichrieb's book, Game of Thrones, I'm becoming convinced that Mary is not going to be the last queen of heaven. That in fact, as a matter of fact, we read it in the last passage, they're going to burn her with fire. They're going to get rid of the Christian part at the very least, and she's going to be replaced, I believe, with a green climate goddess. An actual goddess that is representing the green movement. This is the great wickedness, I believe. So it's either going to be Mary in the basket who turns green, possibility, or it's going to be destroy the Mary part, destroy the Catholic Church part, and have a new goddess. And I think that's actually what's going to happen, because if they're going to burn her with fire, that seems symbolic. They're going to use the Catholic Church these 10 kings. And then they're going to destroy the Catholic Church. And they're going to move from the Catholic Church somewhere else. That somewhere else is probably going to be Babylon, and we'll look at it in the next verse. But first, let's take a look back. This is from the internet, and I forgot to put the source. I apologize. I believe it is Wikipedia, but perhaps not. And it says that ancient Sumerians knew Semiramis as the goddess Inanna. People adored her, especially in her home city of Uruk. Okay, so once again, the Fertile Crescent. They erected many temples to commemorate her as the goddess of sexual love and fertility. This description of her mythical duties was likely an exaggeration of her true life as a prostitute. So they chose to have a real woman represent their god. And she was a prostitute. Kind of goes along with the great whore, huh? If you watch any videos on Inanna, you're going to find out that we're not just talking about sexual love and fertility in a kind of a cleansed way. I mean, we're talking about transgenderism, literally. We're talking about homosexuality. We're talking about all sorts of temple prostitutes, priests having sex with these figures, with these women publicly. And then you think about our own time and you start seeing, wow, this is probably what the future is going to be looking like. This is Inanna. This is Semiramis. This is the Queen of Heaven, the pagan one. It says historical truth often grows to superhuman feats in mythology. Ancient mythology depicts Semiramis as ascending to heaven as a dove. Once again, going up between earth and heaven. Look at that. Where she became the fertility and queen goddess Inanna. Now, nothing quite says fertility like a virgin who can have a child. Think about that for just a minute. Nothing quite represents fertility like a virgin who can have a child. Look at this next line. Inanna's son and husband was Tammuz, the sun god. By the way, Christmas, December 25th, is the day we celebrate Tammuz. He is the son of Inanna. Interestingly enough, he's also her husband. So I want you to think about this for a minute. We celebrate Jesus' birth on the same day that we celebrate Tammuz's birth. Jesus is the son of Mary, but Jesus is king, and Mary has made herself queen. And the only way you become a queen is if you marry the king. We're duplicating history here in the Catholic Church with Mary, and we're following the pattern of Inanna, the Queen of Heaven, the Mother of God. Do you start to see the connections here? Do you start to see how we have been duped in Christianity to take something that is of value, the real Mary of the Bible, and to pervert her into something pagan and wicked, something that is going to become great wickedness in the future? We need to get rid of those things that we may be cherishing that are wrong, even if it hurts to do so. We need to stick with the Bible. It's Jesus, and it's Jesus only. And once again, to all my Catholic friends who may be listening to this, I love you deeply, and I know I'm probably offending you deeply. Please forgive me. I'm just telling you the truth. You would much rather have truth from me and what I believe than to have me pretend something that I don't think. Because I do have very high regard for all of you. So let's move on now that you know where I'm going with this. Once again, we're talking possibly about 3 different goddesses. In the past, with Tower of Babel, we're talking about Semiramis. In the Christian age, we're talking about Mary, Queen of Heaven, not the mother of Jesus, but something demonic that is deceiving us. And in the future, we're probably talking about a green climate goddess of some kind. Now it says here, I asked the messenger who was speaking to me, where are they taking the basket? He replied, to build a temple for her in the land of Babylonia. When it is finished, she will be placed there in her own residence. The Net Bible uses the term Babylonia. New King James Version uses the word Shinar, which puts it closer to where the original Babylon was. Kind of, I believe that's in the southeast corner of Iraq, not too far from Iran. Still in the Fertile Crescent. I believe that's the case. I may be wrong. Sometimes I get directions and things wrong in my head. But at any rate, it may refer to the historical Babylon. This is the religious system of the Antichrist. And notice, once again, the whole vision talks about it moving away, being put in its place. So wherever it is now today, it is going to change physical location. And there's no reason to believe that the Bible isn't being literal and that it will be Babylon. That literally Babylon will be rebuilt. Is it going to take a long time to do that? I don't know. I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen in the future. All I can tell you is what I see here, that whatever this is going to be moved, and the Bible is telling us it's going to be moved. There's a place for it in the land of Babylonia, and that seems to be a rather realistic, literal statement. Once again, we read Revelation 17. In her own residence, suggests that Christianized Mary will be done with in her own place, not just physically, but spiritually. She's not going to have to wear the robes of the Christian Mary. She's going to become the Queen of Heaven, be fully pagan and fully free to deceive, where and as she did in the days of old. So, once again, I ask for your forgiveness. Let's take a look at one last slide here. And I'm showing you something that I stole from Carl Tykrib on his Facebook page. I've been following him on Facebook. I really do like his book, Game of Gods. Carl Tykrib goes where the world is focusing on religion. He goes to the UN meetings, believe it or not. Once again, they actually have religious meetings. He goes to the EU stuff. He goes anywhere. And Burning Man is where the common person is going for religion. This is one that he posted. He's at Burning Man right now, and he posted this image. Now, he doesn't talk about what I'm talking about with Babylon and the baskets. That's not his purpose here. He just took a picture of several things, and this is one of the things he took. At Burning Man, they erect these structures, and then at the end of Burning Man, as a spiritual catharsis, they burn them all down. But this one caught my eye. Take a look at it. If you look closely at the base of this ziggurat, interesting, a basket shape, you'll notice there's actually all throughout, there's a lot of naked women on it. You can't really see very clearly, perhaps, but it's a ziggurat, and they're worshiping it. And this is a shape that we're going to have in the future. It's just very, very, very timely, I think. I can't really go much more into it because, once again, I don't know what's happening. But if you look where the people are, you might even notice, like the heads of the people, I cut out some of the picture. You might even notice some occult images and some skulls. And you notice that there's buildings there. And we have a light there at the top. So we have a representation at the bottom, if you will, of earth. And the light at the top is heaven. And in between, we have something that looks like a basket with things on it that look like whores. Isn't that intriguing? It's not intentional at all. But there it is in a picture form. This was taken just within the month. I really want to recommend, I don't normally recommend non-Christian or Christian books to people because I think you should just read the Bible. I don't even like that people read devotionals. But I'm going to recommend this book by Carl Tykrib. It's Game of Gods, The Temple of Man in the Age of Reenchantment. And as he's gone through these UN meetings and these EU meetings and other places, he's recording how they are going to repaganize the world and how people are talking about these experiences they're having with pagan deities. He even talks about this New Age movement that I got kind of caught up with at the end of high school. He even talks about that. and how they believe the age of Aquarius is going to happen when UFOs, their words, UFOs come and take the Christians off the planet because the Christians are getting in the way of the pagan gods. Isn't that interesting that that's what they believe? I once again recommend Game of Gods. It's about 700 pages long. It is not an easy read. It's not necessarily a fun read. It's disturbing, but it is worth reading. All right. Once again, I want to apologize because I've said some things that that you know have maybe hurt us. I hope maybe they are at least things that you can think about. I love you all. I'm not trying to offend. I just want to love my God and present what He's written to the best that I can. All right. If once again, if you don't know Jesus, and I'm not talking to my Catholic friends here, I'm talking to just anybody. Okay, so please don't think that I'm saying you're Catholic, you're not saved. I'm not saying that because once again, Revelation 3 shows us that Catholics, there's going to be saved Catholics, those who aren't following the religious system. If you don't know Jesus, you really, really, really need to get to know Him soon. Because we're starting to see things that we know are coming in the tribulation. We're starting to see them in our own time. And if we see these things from the future happening in our own time, we know Jesus is coming soon. Now, I know that some of you have heard Pastor Jack, for example, give you the analogy of Christmas and Thanksgiving. And I'm kind of stealing that idea, but he's kind of stealing it from the Bible, so I don't feel too bad. But you really do need to get to know Jesus. You need to be trusting that for Jesus to forgive you of your sins, because time is getting very short. I never expected as a Christian to see the things that I'm seeing in the world today. I thought we would be raptured and gone, and that this would be the setup to the tribulation. But I find myself living in the setup of the tribulation, and I am scared to death. I'm scared to death. And one of the things I'm scared of is that so many of the people that I know don't seem to be following Jesus right now. Don't seem to be watching Him. And you need to be watching for Him. He's coming. He's coming soon. And He's not happy with the world. And we have in Revelation 3 also the church of Laodicea. These are Christians who are not really trusting in Jesus for their sin, for their sin forgiveness. Make sure you are trusting Jesus to take care of your sin. Follow Him. Ask for the Holy Spirit. Let Him lead you daily. All right? That's my plea. Next week, we'll get to Zechariah Chapter 6, where we will have a slightly easier and happier tone, but just as difficult a chapter to interpret. Okay? All right. I love you all. I'll see you next week. Bye-bye.